Hello and welcome back to Drippy Drez. Today I am going to release a podcast at 6 o'clock and then a rap song at 6:30. And I know you're all probably super surprised because you're not used to me doing something like this, because I should be releasing a rap song tonight at 6 o'clock and then a video tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. Well, I don't trust that all of my followers have listened to my last podcast, like the last couple minutes, only because not everyone is into Marvel shows, and I can understand why they would skip the ones where I talk about Marvel shows. So I just wanted to say that my next song was inspired by a time where I used to have implicit biases. And for those of you who don't know what that is, an implicit bias is where you associate something with something, but not necessarily in a bad way. Like, for example, like some people, they might associate some very positive traits with rich people and some very negative ones with poor people, or more likely, they associate a lot of negative traits with rich people and a lot of positive ones with poor people. And I used to be the same way. And it wasn't because I discriminated against people. It was actually because I was trying to liberate people. You see, I am a feminist and a masculinist, and I'm sure you all know what feminism means. It means that either you stand up for women's rights, or you're a firm believer that you should be able to choose whoever you want to be, regardless of your gender or sexual identification. And yes, I am both. And then a masculinist is someone who fights for healthy masculinity. And the reason I used to have implicit biases is because, I used to be very observant, and, I never did it in a bad way, but, I've noticed how guys were more likely to think logically, because I'm a guy, and, girls are more likely to think emotionally. And to be honest, I've always thought that was kind of ridiculous, because back then, guys didn't necessarily think logically, they just refused to think emotionally. Whereas girls, on the other hand, were actually able to think emotionally and logically, and then somehow, because of movies or because of looking at things through the wrong perspective, we got to a point where guys were more likely to think logically and girls were more likely to think emotionally. And because of this, I've made other observations about both genders. And my song is me admitting to an implicit bias I once made. That implicit bias being that I used to think that guys were better listeners. And I know most of you are probably thinking, whoa, this dude's a psychopath. Why would a guy be a better listener? He just said that, guys are more likely to think logically, whereas girls are more likely to think emotionally. Wouldn't a girl, be seen as more caring and more likely to listen? See, not necessarily. My way of thinking used to be that because guys were more likely to think logically, they were more likely to not take stuff personally and to actually be able to understand what the other person is saying. Again, not through an emotional point of view, but for a logical point of view, they were likely to understand, what that person was saying. They weren't gonna let their emotions kick in and think, oh, well, he's trying to say something else. No, they knew what you were trying to say, Whereas girls, because they think emotionally, they're more likely to think, oh, but you're trying to say this, or, oh, but you're trying to say that, or do you mean it in a bad way even though you don't mean it in a bad way, or, oh, do you mean it in a good way, when, like, you're not saying it in a good or bad way, you're just saying it through that way. And the reason that I came out with this song is because I want people to listen to it, and I really want them to reflect on either a time where they made an implicit bias themselves, and whether or not it was accurate, and even whether or not mine has a point. Now, I know I shouldn't, you shouldn't necessarily think like that, but I do think that I was on the right track with noticing that girls take stuff more personally, and that's because they have good reasons to. Because even in 2024, we're still holding on to a lot of the sexist beliefs that we used to have. We're still, making these types of jokes that shouldn't even be funny with this day and age, or with any day and age. We're still, trying to be aware of what other people think, even if the only way they would think something like that is from not having common sense. That plus basing your life off of crappy movies, which is basically the same thing. And I really hope that this song can encourage people to not only admit to times where they've had implicit biases, but to think of ways that we can prevent ourselves from implicit biases, whether it be less screen time and more getting out time, or maybe even less time interacting with people and more time interacting with the right people. But whatever it is, I really hope that my song can create a difference in today's society. And I really hope that this song has what it takes to partially change the world. Well, thank you for listening to my podcast, and I hope you enjoy the upcoming song. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already, and I will talk to you next time on Drippy Drez.